Hello and welcome to It's No Secret. Today we are joined by special guest Rosey Nathan, who will be chatting with us about navigating your career through a recession. To start, a little bit about Rosey. Rosey is a recruitment partner at Customise Talent Partners and the founder of Rosey on Recruitment and Career. She has over 20 years' experience across various industries and a deep understanding of the needs and goals of both candidates and organisations. Through her expertise, Rosey has guided numerous individuals, helped business thrive, and created safe spaces, making her an ideal podcast guest, second time round, to discuss these important career matters. So welcome, Rosey, first of all. So great to have you back.
Thank you. It's lovely to be back here.
I'm so excited to get stuck in, and this is such an area of personal interest, but also really great engagement on the podcast. So, Instagram and podcast, hopefully, for you listening.
It's a good one. Stay buckled in.
Yeah, we're in for a ride.
Why not?
Cool. So let's get stuck in. So how we're going to tackle the episode is we're going to start by running through the kind of setting the scene of the market, and then we'll jump into a couple of side note questions. For those listening, we polled our audience, that's you, on our Instagram, and we have really tried hard to integrate all of your questions plus added a few in there. So to start, I would love for you, Rosey, please, to share what you are seeing out there in the employment market from a recruiter perspective. And given there has recently been various companies, laying off people and a lot of media attention in this space, the likes of Xero, and recently I heard about Lay-By. What are you seeing? What's happening? Take it away.
Well, I guess since 2020, there is no normal anymore. COVID hit recruitment really hard, and that was the worst year that the partners in my organisation had in kind of careers that had spanned over a decade and kind of over 15 years. And we're seeing so many behaviours from organisations that have changed in the way that they are moving through the process of recruitment, what's important to them, how they are utilising resource within businesses. And so naturally, employees and candidates need to be pretty agile in how they respond to that, what's important, really understanding that from the perspective of what does this role mean, not just what is a job title. And so in terms of the market, we are still seeing a really low unemployment rate. So we have the Stats New Zealand information at 3.4%, which is around 99,000 Kiwis out of work. But when you think of it that way, that's not just people that aren't working. There might be other reasons that they're not in the employment market as well. Westpac recently released a report that indicated that number could go up to 5.2% by 2025. That's nothing to be overly concerned about. That is closer to what our usual unemployment rates are, which is around 5 to 6%. So, I don't know if that's answering the exact question of what's happening in the market, but it's a little bit of what's here now with the unemployment rate. So things are still competitive. I've been saying this probably for the last year and a half, and will continue to say it for, I think, the next couple of years. There are particular bands within the market that organisations are really interested in and they need more of, which is kind of operational doers around that 60 to 120K mark, usually irrespective of type of skill base. And then when you get up into anything plus 150, 200K, which is more strategic, alignment of what an entire organization is doing and how they deliver that, those roles are, there's not quite as many of them. There aren't as many of those people moving around. And the reason we're seeing the increase in operational tier as well is that the world has opened up. And so people that couldn't go through an OE previously are taking that opportunity now. Some are going younger just in case the world closes down again. And people have, pivoted out of what was traditionally their career if they were in tourism, or people are coming out of healthcare and they're upskilling and doing other things. So we're seeing there's patches in the market. We're seeing an inconsistency across an industry type where you used to look at, say, construction or banking, and everyone was kind of doing the same thing. There are differentials now within that industry that are quite stark.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
That
covers it there, I think.
You covered everything. It's so great.
And we're done.
Should we leave? I find it really interesting. I mean, that's what I've been hearing from my friends a lot. I personally am in that operational bracket in terms of building the career, but also you're moving from being a doer to maybe slightly senior or, that kind of thing. A lot of people are starting to go overseas, and it's basically like the floodgates have really opened again. Yeah. So that it's nice to hear that is echoed by what you're seeing. In some ways challenging for employers. Are you hearing, some of those challenges arise more often, or like how are they navigating from the employer perspective through that really?
Yeah. And again, in the same vein as lessons that we've learnt from COVID, organisations are still having to change how they attract employees. Had a great meeting with a couple of different clients over the last couple of weeks, new prospects who have been doing a lot of work in-house, but they are just not getting the traction around some of these roles. And some of it's employer brand, but some of it is also just that bridge that a recruiter can provide between an employer and a potential employee, and having really open and honest conversations and getting to the crux of, well, what is it that you're really looking for? What are the objectives? What do you need out of this? What's your career opportunity going to be? How can we roadmap that for 2 to 5 years? Always questions that an internal recruiter will have when they're balancing everything to do with people and culture as well, maybe.
Yeah.
So it's challenging, and there are, what I will caveat that with is the fact that then candidates get despondent when they don't get positive feedback and they're not landing the roles that they would like. Yeah. It is very much, employers are still looking for something quite particular. They still have a very particular need within a business. So if those skill sets aren't there in the marketplace, they are now more willing to hold off on that role, because we have seen some instances where new employees have come in, they haven't really fit the bill, and they've cost the business money. So they are, as much as it's, so you can't just get a warm body into a role, which is a terrible thing to say. That's not what anyone should be doing anyway. But it is around, can we get this person aligned to what the organisation is doing and supporting and collaborating with the rest of the team so that we're lifting the productivity. There's obviously a learning period with anyone stepping into a role, but there are levels of capability. So, this really important piece we're going to cover later about upskilling and what you need to do that, I think helps us to help employers make the right decision around if we can fit into those particular roles.
Yeah. I find that fascinating, because it's kind of a question of how much pain is too much pain for the employer, in terms of like, can we hold off on this role and just kind of suck it up for a while as the team that we have with that gap there, as the opportunity cost of getting someone in that doesn't fit the role, and then you have to deal with, HR and all these things that can kind of expand into a much bigger problem.
Yeah, and burnout's probably the number one we're seeing across different organisations, where that tightrope of, we want to get the best person in for you. So again, contracting's been huge in the last couple of years, but we are seeing a reduction in that due to companies being a little bit more cautious with where we're heading in terms of recession and temporary roles, and just, people coming in and not really having the same level of association with a brand. So that's really important. You do get some contractors that are amazing. They can hit the ground running and they absolutely want to do the best for whatever brand they're working on. But it's, have you got that type of contractor or temp? And in a recent conversation with a client, they've just employed somebody new. It was a role that was outstanding for 7 months. And they did have somebody that had accepted the role, but for personal reasons, unfortunately couldn't actually continue on, so they needed to reopen the process. And now they have lost 2 of the senior leaders in that team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there were just some kind of indications of resource and them being burnt out, and the inability to kind of support their other team members in the way that they wanted to. So they went to market and then found things were pretty attractive out there. So there is a consequence of also losing great people in a team. There's no one right way to do it.
I mean, if there was a silver... It's a tightrope, really.
Yeah, I would say that the best thing that you can do is open those lines of communication, really understand whatever individual unique pain points there are for your people, and try and build some resilience in with backup. And so things like allowing people to shadow so that they can continue to grow in their own careers. And if you have something unexpected happen, then you have that contingency built in.
Yeah, right. And so from the employee perspective, it's the same kind of thing around communicating along the way, or as you're edging closer maybe to that burnout, or really feeling the pressure.
Yeah.
If that's your reality.
Getting stuck in BAU, obviously that's the issue, is that people are burnt out because they are so overwhelmed with the work that they need to complete. But it's so important to check in and create some space every week around, well, what do I want to happen in 6 months or a year's time? Because unless you understand that yourself, you can't lay a path that will help to lead you there with your employer. Yeah, it is about creating that time. It will help you and your employer in the long run. It will allow you to just get better as you move through your career at having those conversations in a way that's factual, that is, it's based on the work that you're performing, the objectives, how you're helping projects move along, and not on your emotion because you've now reached a tipping point.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. Great tips. Thank you. So just coming back to the state of the market, and you touched on this in a certain way, but I'm keen to get more of a definite answer. Has it shifted from being an employee market to an employer market?
Yeah, and some industries have. So we've talked about the media, we've touched on that already briefly, and you can see those areas that they're highlighting. I think if you've got any interest in this whatsoever, because this is going to flux, it always has, it always will, but Seek have a State of the Nation type report that comes out monthly that gives you some facts and figures on each of the individual industries. So being somebody that has pivoted in my career historically, I always find that fascinating, and even looking back on the work that I did in transportation at the beginning of my career, kind of seeing, there's obviously different roles within that industry, but that's an industry type. So they are lots of different recruitment drives on for particular industry types, but people have moved out, and as I mentioned earlier, they might have found that the grass is greener. They can work particular hours versus having worked shift work previously. They're getting a better hourly rate. I understand in New Zealand's just gone to market with, that increased minimum wage. So that puts pressure on others that are offering kind of similar types of roles. Comes back to employer brand. Do you have a clear pathway if this person joins you of what the opportunities are if they excel? So everyone's having to be a lot more thoughtful around how they communicate that information. And, some employers have fantastic brands, and they will get a great amount of candidates that they can choose from at a really high caliber. But if you're an employer and you're not, that's not necessarily your fault. It's that skill set match, and people are still upskilling in new ways. But how do we bridge that gap? I think the biggest question is, how do we bridge that gap between people that have gone through the process of learning particular, say, development languages or project management skills, or so many different areas, and get them into meaningful work so they've got that 2 years of experience? Because I know that's such a pain point for many. And then that next step of how do we have people that are in these positions that are doing fantastic jobs and want to be in leadership roles? How do we create those pathways? So I think we need to look more at the pathways and understand people's capabilities, and have they been successful in other ways, and can they show that in a tangible way to then allow them, something new in a new field, which is scary for employers. And but most of those employees absolutely give it everything because they want to prove themselves. So it's difficult. It's that checkbox versus each individual that you meet.
Oh, I have so many thoughts. There's so many questions, and I've forgotten half of them.
That's just creating more questions instead of answers.
So on the note of creating a clear pathway for people, I come at the context of, or I guess the perspective around being more of a smaller business, let's say, and there's a fine balance between just needing to get things done and needing the people who have the skills to do those things. As well as like retention, making sure there is that pathway. And then also as an employee, I'm like, I really want those opportunities. And I want to be basically it's a risk for a manager at a business or whatever to put you in the position where you don't know what you're doing, or maybe you don't have the soft skills that you need in order to do the job that you're working towards or possibly promoted into or whatever. I don't know what my question is, but any thoughts on that?
How do I do that?
just, I guess, how can the company support the individual who may, better, or how do I, as the employee, show that I'm capable or worthy of being given that opportunity?
Yeah. So not all of it has to be absolutely linked to the business, but it should increase the value that you bring to the business, right? So right from early on in my career, I was involved in groups like B&I. So I became an assistant director with that organization when I was in my early 20s because I was wanting more leadership opportunities. And at that time in freight forwarding, very few opportunities for a female in sales and lots of very senior men that had been in those roles and that were not moving out of them. So it's what do I actually want to achieve and how can I gain that experience in ways that are meaningful? So I did that, did Toastmasters myself. I know there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of years about side hustles and or starting your own business and making those things happen. And then I was reading a really interesting article a couple of weeks ago about get people to stop the side hustles like that. Of course, it's let's start something and let's completely stop that. So is the side hustle going to bring you those skills with some type of tangible output? And if not, what are the other things you can do? So, as I said, Toastmasters, B&I, we just off air, we're talking about how I am now on a board, so that governance piece and everything that you're exposed to there. So, the financial opportunities, HR and policy and direction. So what is it? I guess the question is, what is it? And can you explain back to the business the value that could add? So I know a lot of people doing short courses at Auckland University, or they're doing, pay for my LinkedIn learning and I'll do X number of courses. There's so many different ways, but I think you've just got to be really clear on what it is that or at least kind of the theme of what you're looking for. Is it around product? Is it around leadership? Is it around technical skills? So you can't do all of it at once, but you can dip in. And I'm kind of a binge person, so I will get into a TV show or I will, watch movies and then rabbit hole it all. And then that's done for that month. So, whereas some people like a more measured approach. So you've also got to understand your style, right? So what's the best way that you can learn these skills, apply them in really relevant ways to your role and to your progression within the business. And just make sure that it's aligned to those KPIs, which is always the important piece. There's no point feeling like I'm doing all this work.
And it's off on a tangent that doesn't get me to it. I find that really interesting because I think clarity is something that's very hard for myself to know what I want and and where I want to go.
Great at talking about it, not necessarily walking the path always.
But I found what was really useful for me is last year I did a 3-month career coaching thing with a family friend who would highly recommend, and I'm sure you also have
I do.
you can do coaching with Rosey. And that just helped me understand, because I think it's really hard to ask yourself the questions that need to be asked from an objective point of view to get you that in that way of thinking as to the direction you want to take. So it's understanding the skills more than the job title, as you said before, right? And it's what actually comes under that and what am I good at? And is it the subject matter, or is it the fact that actually for me the struggle is stakeholder management? So do I just need to get better at that, and then I would enjoy all of this other stuff a bit more? And so unpicking what the pain points are, or pulling out what the things are that you love the most.
And really deeply understanding where that path can take you, because you can go all the way down a path and then be absolutely miserable.
And that's okay too. You can come back or tangent or pivot.
Absolutely. So I think, clarity and kind of the direction, but also just giving yourself permission to change that course, which is, life is short.
Be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Let's use all of those catchphrases.
It's never too late. Beginner mindset. I love this. I love this tangent. Okay, coming back to the market. So to summarize, do you feel as though now is a bad time to be changing jobs? So you talked about the stats in terms of the unemployment rate and the fact that we are actually a lot lower, and Westpac has forecast for that to increase again. If I was reading into that, then I would say that it is not a bad time to be looking for a job.
Yeah. I would always say it is based on your personal financial position and the responsibilities you have in your life. So going back to kind of what I'd shared earlier in my last podcast about, I became a stepmother really young. I had a huge amount of family responsibility and costs that made me ensure that I had stability in my income and in the next step opportunities. So that was my driver. And yes, different time many years ago, but that I think needs to form part of your decision-making process. And I would always err on the side of caution. So, try and have something set up. Ensure you've got that emergency fund or that living fund for the next few months. But I never think it's a bad time for people to change a role. And just to make sure that you've got kind of what you are looking for in this role, understanding what the culture is, understanding kind of where you're heading. We've seen a lot happen in the last couple of years of people moving roles because it was quite heavily money-based and focused, and maybe the title was also bright and shiny and new. And I did have one of the partners that was speaking to a candidate this morning, and their title was director. And she's like, I'm just not sure if this aligns to this particular role, and the person has no direct reports, and, the salary wasn't quite at a director level as you would expect. And then they didn't actually have enough experience for the particular role. So there's titles, and then there's the money, and then are you actually going to get that experience to take you to the next step anyway if you were to apply for something external?
In terms of, the thought that comes to my head is there, do you see in terms of number of jobs available, is there more or less?
Yeah, again, back to the SEEK report, that's quite hard to quantify because so few candidates were applying for roles via SEEK that most people are now not advertising every role there is on SEEK.
Yeah, right.
From a recruitment industry perspective, a lot more headhunting has needed to happen. You put a role on SEEK back in 2019 and you would get anywhere between kind of 20 and 100 applicants for most roles. And then that just fell away to, great roles being advertised over, normally the period is a month. You'd kind of start shortlisting in a week or two, depending on the urgency with the client. But some of those might be up, as you would see, there's, posts that might be 20 odd days old, and then it would refresh in another couple of weeks and be up for another month. So some of those stats are, it's difficult to quantify, but Stats New Zealand have the
real-time data.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
So there have been, and the reason I say that is because it has been a little bit of a roller coaster, and that number is also impacted by layoffs and people knowing who's in the market and people being able to shoulder tap again as opposed to interviewing.
Yeah, cool. And you also briefly touched on this before, but thinking about what can I as the potential employee do to find these roles? So if companies aren't advertising them on SEEK, let's say because they're like, I'm giving up, or maybe we'll pull back now for the future. Is there merit in an employee going direct to let's say they see the employer brand, they're like, this is a place I want to work, I get good vibes from this culture, it fits all my things, they've got this other job here advertised, and the flexible working sounds like it's for me, worth the conversation or reaching out to be like, hey, is there anything behind the scenes that I don't know that you haven't advertised?
So my top tips for a potential candidate would be starting with how you can market yourself without being there 24 hours a day, right? So SEEK, the back end of SEEK, ensure that your CV is up to date, be realistic with your salary expectations, be accurate with where you're located, and tick the right boxes on if you want to be full-time and permanent or part-time or contract. And the more of that information that you pull out and the better the keywords that you add to your CV, the more chance recruiters will have of finding your details on the back end of SEEK. So that's, point number one. Point number two, update your LinkedIn profile. And and make sure that you've got skills there. If you can access LinkedIn Learning, show that you're working through some of the certificates that are aligned to the work that you perform. Ask people for recommendations and ask them to be specific in that recommendation. So if you're wanting them to highlight the work you do in product or in CX or as a salesperson, try and ask them to write a sentence about that. And also to be open that if I can give you some bones for that, or if you're too busy, like, how can I help you? So you've got the words of others on your LinkedIn profile. And because recruiters will use the back end of LinkedIn as well. So I know a lot of people aren't using LinkedIn as much as they historically have. Whether you use it or not, that's not a problem, but set up your profile and make sure all of that information is there. So it won't have the salary details, but if you have your contact details, and you don't have to put the big open for work around your...
green thing.
You can have open for work without it being a public statement. So you can have it so that anyone that's got Recruiter, so I have a Recruiter subscription, I will very often utilize the filters. It looks around seniority, around keywords. So exactly the same thing. Post doing seek, update everything on LinkedIn.
Cool.
And then... reach out to people on LinkedIn and tell them that you are actively looking for a role and that you love their organization, and work with, say, 1 or 2 recruitment agents that you trust, and that will be an advocate for you, because we will hear things that either don't go to market. We've got relationships with people. We've got no problem knocking on a door. And, if that's a list of people you want to work with, and who do we know in our networks that we've been able to assist with, or if we can't, we will be, okay, well, that is the person in the organization, go and speak with them. So for me, the objective is ensuring that the relationship that I have with somebody is trusted, and that they will feel open enough to give me a call at any time to ask these questions. And, you never know where people end up. We might not be able to work with their company today, but I've certainly had that instance where they've moved somewhere, and all of a sudden, they need to hire 2 or 3 people, and they'll come to us, and then, we can re-engage in a brand new relationship. Recruitment, it's very much a gift to be able to work with people at such an important time in their lives, and also for their organizations to then be able to produce amazing work and impact their clients with the right resource on board.
Yeah, love that. In today's environment, is it reasonable to expect a pay rise equal to inflation as a minimum, especially if you are someone that considers yourself to be a high-performing team member?
Yeah. I've thought about this in 2 ways, because people that generally see themselves as high performers, yes, they are, and they can prove that, but they're also, they're quite happy to advocate around that, and they've taken all of those lessons about that communication and how to have these conversations. Not saying everybody has, but that's generally the case. I would love to give this advice to those that feel that, when they don't get a pay rise, or they're not sure how to have this conversation, let's take it back to the basics of that, because everybody should get to a point where they're comfortable of at least asking the question. The question isn't going to make your employer freak out.
It's a normal part
it is a normal part of working with an organization, is expecting to be receiving a complete package that is comparable to market and comparable to the work that you are providing. So again, we need to look at what's happening within your industry. Not all industries are at a level where they can meet these inflationary increases. But if you're a high performer and you can quantify exactly how you have impacted the business, then absolutely you need to build a business case around that. And I always advocate for creating the space. You can start by having, if you do have a usual one-on-one with your manager, raising it that, in the next few weeks, I would like to have a conversation specifically around this. Could we dedicate a whole one-on-one time? Should we separate that time out? And then be really prepared. And it depends. Some people are like, go in and then plead your case. And I think coming in and having, something really basic you can cover that's high level, but having all of the content that you can leave with your manager to absorb and to understand and ask questions around, so that you've got kind of this follow-up meeting to then come to a conclusion is, it should take 2 or 3 meetings. Sometimes it's a mention of it and the employer is like, yeah, we need to give you something great.
Yeah.
But what I'm asking people to prepare for is kind of the longer case scenario. Yeah. So it's better that you're over-prepared for that than walking in hoping you'll mention a pay rise and that you'll just instantly receive 15%, because it's happened. Yeah. I know it's happened, but it's very rare. Yeah. So don't set that as your expectation.
Yeah, cool. So just while we're here, tips on this. So what is the role of external industry data in those conversations? And then any kind of, in the first podcast that we did, we talked about having a bottom number, a middle, kind of like, this is where I'm like happy with that, and then a high ball, like I would be ecstatic with that.
Yeah.
What are some other tips or things for walking into that conversation? And also, if you're already in a role and it's kind of you're hoping for a pay rise versus coming into an initial negotiation, are you as the employee, and is that a place that you can negotiate on a pay rise or not?
Yeah, I mean the truth is, and I think most people would see and understand this, is that it can be more difficult to leverage a pay rise if you're staying in the same role within an organization versus entering or having a promotion. Yeah. So that is the most difficult conversation out of the 3. Yeah. So preparing for that is essential. I think that ensuring you've got like real substance around that bottom dollar. And sometimes people want to have a backup plan of, okay, what do I do in securing a new role if it doesn't shift at all? Yeah. And that has been something that I know has been really empowering for some people that I've worked with and I've had discussions with when we've talked about kind of that pay situation, and they've gone off and done something a little bit different for a while to kind of reset. Yeah. So again, this comes back to what do you need out of it? The tips are just around you've got to be clear in understanding what your needs are, what's realistic in the industry. Do you have the financials of the company, of the department? How is the business doing? Can you forward plan some of this? I know that some people that have stepped into stretch roles, and this is, again, someone new into the business, they have negotiated specific discussions around a set figure for a pay rise in the first kind of 6 months. And there's no reason why you can't do that as an employee. But I've also heard instances where people are just, the management keep pushing that off. So you need to ensure that those milestones are met. If you can prove that you're keeping up your end of the bargain, then the business also needs to do the same. And this comes back to just building trust and respect within an organization, which comes back to the great type of culture and employer brand that you want somebody to work with. Yeah, cool. So you touched on briefly the employer financials. Yeah. What role does that play in the conversation? Yeah, I mean, it is important because and it depends on the size of the business, right? And I've worked in all sizes. So just understanding what the forward plan is and what resource they have at their fingertips. And kind of if you see that senior management and leadership are doing a huge number of conferences and traveling loads and getting bonuses and increases, and then nobody else is, that is a bit of a worrying sign with how they value the entirety of that team. Yeah. So I think it's important to understand it. It's important to have some level of transparency. Obviously, you can't always get down into the detail of it. And then of the plan of where they're sitting against kind of these targets. But are the targets realistic, or are the targets there to show that we are miles away from it, so we can't kind of give anybody any increases? And how often are salespeople reaching their targets? And what is the market looking like, and what are the future opportunities, and what's in the pipeline? So all of that, I mean, it's like, but I'm an administrator doing this over here. It's still a part of, the entirety that you are contributing towards. Yeah, love that. I have 2 thoughts. So also thinking about when their financial year starts, because usually budgets are set for the entirety of the financial year. So, try to maybe line those conversations up around that time, or like preemptively to understand, hey, I recognize that this financial year is coming. Can we have a conversation about this? And then I was thinking also from an employer or a manager perspective, it is quite good to give the employee that context, so because there is a level of understanding, particularly if it is a small business and it's founder led, or it's, mum and dad who run the family business or whatever, like there's a certain element of
clarity that can help you empathize with their situation and then make the decision as to whether that is okay with you or not, and come to like more of a longer term, like how do we work with this ongoing, and if I meet XYZ kind of targets, what impact does that have on the business to then unlock future opportunities?
It shows that a leader's being proactive too, right? And really considering what type of information allows you to have those conversations that are valuable in a way for you to really kind of take away, and this is my input and this is where the organisation is, because it will break down into obviously company financials, department financials, and then everything else that links into that jigsaw puzzle. So it might be that you are just having those conversations at a department level, and that's kind of the budget that you're going to get, and there's no wiggle room there. But there's generally reviews quarterly or at least every half year. So it depends on the work that's coming and then your ability to shine during that work, right?
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Love it. Great tips. Thank you. So circling to redundancy. How does redundancy work in New Zealand, and is there a typical payout period? Let's start there.
How does it work in New Zealand? Well, this is a question that I am going to take on at a high level, because there can be specific clauses within individual employment contracts that differ from this, and some of those are based on length of service and seniority. So in terms of the process, we have a fair process that needs to be followed by an employer who is considering making a role disestablished. And it's really interesting to see what's happening in the marketplace at the moment, and obviously posts from people that have recently been disestablished, and a number of them in the marketplace. And having been through this myself kind of 3 years ago, I absolutely understand. And language is important. So, there's lots of people saying, I've been made redundant. And I always go back to them and say, no, your role is disestablished. So this is not,
reflection on your ability. It's a business change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so many reasons why. And you can't delve into kind of the what ifs. It's one of those situations that, okay, we're having this conversation. So what's next? My first port of call would be around Employment New Zealand, just to make it's free online information that will allow you to understand if your employer is following a correct process. Yeah. So go there. That's the base minimum that your employer should be doing. And it's around kind of the consultation first and how that is set up, and requiring support for this fair process. And so during that consultation, there might be other options that are made available, and you need to be given a fair amount of time to consider these and also to respond back. So that's kind of, more around the process. So you will receive notification of termination or payment in lieu of that. And that's generally aligned to a usual notice period. So for the majority of Kiwis, that will be 4 weeks or 6 weeks. If you feel that this has not followed a fair process, there are a number of fantastic employment lawyers that can assist. I would absolutely recommend then taking those next steps and going and seeking some advice, starting something fresh and looking towards these new opportunities, because the majority of people that I know that have ever been through a role at disestablishment have come out of the other side far more resilient and in fantastic roles and businesses.
Love that. Yeah. Very insightful. Yeah. I feel like I need to go do some reading on it as well. Because, for my own understanding, should that ever happen, or for people around you, so that you can kind of have those conversations to support them through it.
It can feel really difficult if you've worked all your life to get to a position. So at the time, I think there's a lot of emotion happening. But I had some great support, and so my key support people in the meeting with me, that's important too. If you need that support, reach out, get people you trust that can be there and help to witness and just get you through some of that emotion if that's required. Just connecting and making sure that you can feel supported at a time that can be really, really difficult.
Tough. Yeah, definitely. So thinking, I guess, if someone has just been made redundant, and we talked a little bit on some tips in terms of finding new opportunities. Yeah. Any tips outside of what you've already said around navigating that time, looking for a new role?
Yeah. So take some time if you can to just really sit in, process what you're feeling and kind of why you're feeling that way. So I think a lot of what happened with myself was, you go back of, did I make the wrong career choice 7 years ago that led me to this
point, and did I choose
my
that?
life? And so does that really matter? Like, have some time to have those thoughts though, and then realize how inconsequential they are to your current process and moving forward. And take this time to look at something that you are really passionate about, like do something joyful. For me, that's nice. Like jumping on a Lime scooter and going 30 k's down the road. And
Rosey scooted here.
Rosey did scooter here. Just do fun things. I got out with my dog a lot and kind of pick up some new items of joy that you have been too busy to do. Connect with people that you've not connected with in a long time. So do a little bit of that, and then you're going to need to get busy. Unfortunately, bills still need to be paid. You will need a role at some point. I would encourage people to be open to contract and temp roles during this period. It might expose them to new businesses and new ways of working and new skills that they can develop while they're looking for that permanent, perfect role. But I do know some people who have been through the process. They got an offer of a great permanent role and they didn't take it because I've only been on the market for a couple of weeks, and now they're 3 or 4 months out of work and they kind of like a really need a role now. So do be careful with being, with thinking that, again, going back to the fact that the employment rate is low and that something will come up like instantaneously. I'm not saying take anything. There might be a permanent role out there that might not be perfect permanently for you. Could they maybe make that a 6-month contract for you to kind of get a feel for? Everything for you is negotiable right now. So you can ask all of the questions. You don't have anything that you're scared of kind of losing. You're not instantly having to get out of something because now you're out of it. So, ask the questions that you would not maybe normally ask in a usual interview, and continue to upskill. So, but I'll come back to bring some joy into your life. Don't do a little of the wallow, then bring in all the joy. You're
allowed your wallowing time. Time box it and then forward thinking. That's very privileged of me to say, but absolutely. I know. I do appreciate that, and sometimes that has to be a very small amount of time. We were certainly in a situation when I was younger that my parents were not able to take any of that time. It was definitely week to week. So however you can find that space, do try. Yeah, definitely. Do you think that there's a risk, and you kind of touched on this, of because you may be at that point of desperation where you just then rush into something that isn't suitable for you? Any kind of tips there? I guess, is it then coming back to temp maybe to get you through that struggle or get you through the period that you've, bills are due, and then see what you can get more long term? It's
unfortunate, but some employer brands that don't have a great name in the industry, or they just actually are bad employers, because unfortunately there are those out there in the market too. They might attract some great talent, but they will only have them for a certain amount of time if that's the case. So yes, I do know of some people that have taken roles that they're not completely in love with and they don't feel will be them long term, but they are still delivering while they're there. But they've certainly benchmarked that they've got a time period on this and they are actively looking at the same time. I think it comes down to, personally, what is it that you want to achieve within the business, and can you still leave knowing that you've held your own integrity and values intact?
And maybe you learned something along the way.
Absolutely. You still want to leave any place in a better position than you arrived.
And what would you say to someone thinking, well, I don't want to take a short-term opportunity because how does that look on my CV if I'm then moving on? But then also, how do I explain to this next employer that I have been, my role has been disestablished? I'm going to change my language. Because that might feel really scary. I logically think, well, you can frame it and it's all in the language of how you talk about that. Anything to add on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that from a recruiter's perspective and most employers' perspective now, it's not at all a reflection on the individual. So there's a stigma that has been around for many years, but particularly in New Zealand, I think that we are pretty open to understanding that these things have now happened on a global scale. They've happened to some pretty fantastic people. Most of us know somebody that has been through a process, and as long as you were clear on your story. So again, I actually go through I've done quite a few mentoring sessions with people that have been disestablished and coming up with the articulation where they can now deliver that information in an interview and they don't feel that shame and they have confidence around factually, this is what's happened. So it's removing that level of emotion and connection and whatever the feelings are for you. Like some people absolutely have no issue with it at all and they've been through like 3 or 4 disestablishments and it's just like, great, I'm on to the next thing. So you've got to find the level of comfort that you can with it, but at the very least you need to just disassociate and try and talk about that part and that story as if it was somebody that you really care about, like a friend. My friend went through this. How would you explain that situation if it was them? I think we touched on this in my last interview as well. I just find some space to articulate what it is and people understand.
People are human, right?
Yes.
I do find it interesting because I have definitely had it ingrained in me as well, the stigma that is attached to, it's only the high performers that are left at the company that, in terms of redundancies. And does that, if that was to happen to me, let's say, would that mean that I'm not a great worker or whatever? But I think it is where it comes back to like kindness. What can you show in terms of your performance, and then just the language that you use. Those are great tips.
Absolutely.
Love it. So to round out, because we've had such great conversation so far, 2 kind of left field questions that the listeners of the pod would love to hear your thoughts on. So number 1 is, what is a standard maternity policy for a quote unquote office job?
So there is a standard, and again, Employment New Zealand have a really great chart, and there is a relationship obviously between IRD and the maternity policies that are the law in New Zealand. So they will take your average pay over 26 weeks and pay up to a threshold. So they will take your highest earning of the last 52 weeks and then you'll get that amount of pay. What we're now seeing is that some organisations will go above and beyond to bridge that gap between the IRD payments for maternity leave and what your usual income is, like ANZ, which we touched on just before this. So they will perform that top up. And then they're not the only ones, but they are great at being able to advocate for particular policies that they have in the workplace and obviously being female focused and supportive as well. So there are a number of organisations that will do that. It's always really interesting because I talk with a number of women around, when should I let my employer know? Should I be interviewing if I am pregnant? There's obviously some gaps between when maternity leave becomes available if you're a new employee, but that can be negotiated. I've had somebody who started a role and they were already partially pregnant, and the company was more than happy to, within the time period, ensure that they were looked after and supported. So again, it comes back to that communication. And if you do have a prospective hiring manager that absolutely balks at the fact that you could sometime in the next 2 or 3 years be leaving to have children, then that's probably a red flag. Probably not the culture for you. I guess the only other thing that I was going to say is, with my maternity leave, but I was headhunted while I was on maternity leave, which I thought was super interesting. And my son was 3-4 months old. And so I was upfront with the recruiter and I said, look, I don't think I'd be the most attractive prospect because I literally just had a baby and I knew I had the work environment to return to that would be supportive, but I needed to get back to work a little bit earlier than we'd anticipated. And my company wasn't quite sure because it had temp cover if that was going to be possible. So there were all of these kind of
question marks.
And cogs. And they were great. And I'm still very good friends with the owner of that business. So I went for this interview and was just I think I did the thing that I was explaining to others they should do if they're in this period of redundancy. Ask questions you wouldn't normally ask. You've got some sort of security or there's nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Went through 2 interviews, did a presentation, received the offer. Couldn't get a babysitter to go in and sign the contract because back in those days there was no electronic signing. So I took my baby in his car seat and carrier, my baby, not toddler, baby, along to sign my contract. And the managing partner at the time got him out and was walking around the boardroom.
Oh, that's so cute.
Carrying my son. So, great opportunity. I absolutely never thought that would be the case or a possibility. And it was. So try and think beyond what your own mental expectations or limitations particularly could be, because something great could be on the other side of that. And they were an amazing company to work with, huge amount of flexibility. But I thought that might
definitely.
help,
That's great
give
insight.
some hope. He's 17 now. That was a long time ago, and I think things were even harder back then. So it shows. There's lots of progression that's happened in that space. So I wouldn't be afraid that we've got some stigmas that we create ourselves, and if we don't have the conversation, we don't allow others to surprise us with opportunity.
Yeah, love that. Cool. And very last question.
Yes.
Possibly my favorite question.
Yay.
How do you know when it's a good time to move on from a job that you're possibly comfortable?
It's so hard. Are you growing? Are you still growing in ways that are important to where you want to head overall in your career? I think that's kind of the first question to ask. There's people that can be really comfortable in their roles, still being high performers, adding great value, bringing new perspective, but sometimes you can be in a role so long that you are viewing it purely from a company perspective.
Yeah.
Like you've kind of lost your ability to have this view that is outside of kind of intrinsically what the organization is. So ask yourself that question, am I challenging myself enough? Am I curious enough around these things? If new people come in and they question, am I automatically defensive around, no, this is the way we do things and this is how it always is? Because technology moves on and people move on and client expectations move on. So you need to be able to remain curious and ask the tough questions while working for something that you love if you're comfortable in it. It's not a bad thing, as long as you're still growing and you're still adding value and you're still curious about the new ways that the organization can grow, why leave something great?
Do you think that it ebbs and flows with life stages as well?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think women feel that a lot more. I've had some conversations recently at a conference I attended for Reimagining Wahine and Leadership, and we've talked very much about kind of those ebbs and flows and just some life lessons that you learn and all of the energy you put into something, and then when it doesn't work out as expected, it might not be in that moment that you feel it. It might be 2 or 5 years later. And so taking some time around, again, that curiosity and value. Why are you doing the things you're doing? Are things still bringing you joy? Are you still adding value? Those are pretty simple questions.
Yeah, love it. Oh, I can relate to that so much. It's such a fine balance, I think, between ambition and comfort, because some advice that I was given was also, when you kind of think about a role, there's going to be probably a time period where you may be a little bit comfortable, but there's a lot of merit in that as well, in terms of, being the person that you build confidence because you know what you're doing. You can mentor others. You learn a lot through mentoring others. And maybe if you've got the technical side nailed and you're comfortable there, where else can you stretch your skills, the softer skills or things like that? And sometimes if your life is hectic outside of work, having a job that you can just be comfortable in for a little bit is a great thing. So it's kind of the holistic perspective, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, from putting purely my recruitment lens on, if you're looking at something around 5 years, that's a great tenure because the average of turnover at the moment is closer to 3. And people are very ambitious. So in the younger stages of a career, you would anticipate that people are moving on, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, people have made some very large advancements in their roles and not always necessarily with the skill set to match.
So my partner has been at his job that he has at the moment for 6 or 7 years. It's the only job that he's ever had. And it's interesting because there's so much conversation around, you know, Gen Zs, millennials, you know, moving roles, jumping around. And then, you know, is it almost seen as a bad thing to stay in your job for 10 years at, you know, maybe different stages of your career as well? Because there is like peak moments and then you can plateau, and then I think you reach a certain point, or from what I've seen, where you start to value other things. And so it's not, you know, it's the flexibility, it's the maternity policy, it's the, can I leave work at 3 to pick up my kids or whatever.
Yeah. It does come down to each individual. So I know so many people that look at the roles that I've had, and I went through a number of roles earlier in my career and was very fortunate to learn lots in those new roles. And I would have friends say, my God, that's like, this is amazing. And look at what you're doing. I'm like, God, this is so hectic having to go in and do new things.
It's exhausting.
It's so exhausting. I'm like, look at you. You've been in your role for like 7 years. That sounds comfortable and amazing. You go in, you do all the things, you know where everything is. So there's, again, no one right way to do it. Right? I think as long as there's particular projects that he can speak to, if there's any advancements in terms of what he's been exposed to and that roadmap that he can then articulate back to a recruiter if he needed to. Like, that's always something to keep in the back of your mind. If there was something that meant that I couldn't work in this business anymore, it might be disestablishment, it might be that something happens with the organization globally or with the industry globally. That's not something that is potentially, you know, impossible in this day and age. How would I then describe what I do and ensure that that was received in a way that's marketable to, you know, the wider audience of employers.
Cool.
So no, I think that's great if he's doing what he does and he loves it. And you know,
I hope he listens to this episode. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that.
We're like, we'll be in the car listening.
Look, there it is. Love it. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Rosey, for all of your amazing insights.
And so easy to just chat, says.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And for taking on all my side curvy questions. I would love for you to please share with the listeners of the pod how they can get in touch with you, but also what you have coming up, because I know that you have a few exciting things on the go.
Absolutely. So best way is via LinkedIn, surprise, which is Rosemary or Rosey, R-O-S-E-Y Nathan at Customise Talent Group. I have a couple of great items going on. So we've got an IML, which is the Institute of Managers and Leaders coffee catch up. They're going to happen every couple of months in West Auckland and in Central Auckland. So there's a call just bringing together, we're a not-for-profit organisation, but they create chartered managers, and the whole vision is to create better managers for a better society. So I think joining us for a cup of coffee for any leaders that are out there or any aspiring leaders, we also want to just kind of share the knowledge that we have with anyone that would love to step into that. It's great. Customise Talent have just opened We Tech, Women Empowered in Technology, and we have now saved the date for the 15th of June for our first panel discussion. So if you are in technology or in the industry of technology, you know, you might be in finance or administration, but in a tech company, then come along. We just really are creating a safe space for women and non-binary to share their experiences and feel connected within technology.
Love it.
And then obviously recruitment and career mentoring are my two main items.
Your bread and butter.
If you want me to help you with your roadmap of resource or find a new role or kind of set aside that time and space to articulate your story, then reach out. Love to hear from you.
Love it. Thank you so much. And for anyone listening who wants to dig into the details, we've mentioned a lot of great resources today, so we will be sure to pop those in the show notes and wherever you listen to your podcast, also on the gram. So don't forget to follow us at It's No Secret NZ, and we will chat to you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.